for us, it's not just remixing the content, but it's remembering the importance of the data or the reportage, right? The reporting is in that, and leveraging that in other ways.
You're listening to the Content 10x podcast, where it's all about content repurposing. I'm Amy Woods, and I'm here to help you maximize your content and find smart ways to get your message in front of more of the right people, whilst also saving time. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and in this episode, I'm talking to Chris Hutchins, who is the Director of Content Strategy at 6th Sense. We had a fantastic conversation, a really in-depth talk about the power of repurposing long-form written content, why finding a way to measure the impact of your content can be so challenging sometimes, and some of the great unexpected results that he's got from repurposing content. This episode follows off the back of our recent conversations with Jess Cook and Ashley Foss in episodes 301 and 302, which is a part of our B2B Leaders mini-series. So I've asked top leaders in the B2B marketing space the same questions, all related to repurposing, and their responses are so helpful and have been very varied too, which is great. So if you haven't already, take a listen to those episodes. But for now, back to Chris and let's dive in. Chris, welcome to the Content 10x podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh gosh, thank you so much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here.
Oh, we had such a fantastic conversation on B2B content strategist. You were definitely one of the first people I wanted to get in touch with about this special series that we're doing on repurposing content, speaking to leaders like yourself in fantastic organization. So I cannot wait to jump into this conversation. So to kick things off, the killer first question, what is your favorite type of content to repurpose? I know there's so many different types, but is there a particular favorite that you just love to repurpose?
Yeah, we find a lot of value in extracting as much meat off the bone of long form content as we can, creating like long form guides, ebooks, how-tos, whatever, even like research reports that our research team creates. These things that are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, multiple thousand words long have so much the great material in them that it would be a shame to just simply invest all the time, effort, money, creative energy, both on like pre-production in terms of let's determine the scope of this thing and let's do all the research for this thing and let's outline this thing, all the way through the writing and then the editorial process at the end where we're collaborating with maybe the video team or our graphics team. That, and just to have that kind of give birth to this great big baby and it just live in one place in one form is a joyful experience in its own way, and it generates value. But there's just so many ways to take that content and remix, downmix, make it just optimize that content for social, all other kinds of channels. Yeah, there's a great big investment in writing those big pieces of content, and they're sometimes painful to do, but the outcome can help us throughout many channels and formats.
Yeah, in terms of the long form content in particular, is there a format that you really enjoy working with from a repurposing perspective in terms of, you mentioned reports and big written pieces. So is it the long form written content in particular that you favor when it comes to repurposing? Yeah.
Yes. And mostly because we don't do a whole lot of long form video. And one of the reasons is because that is a very time consuming and effort filled and expense filled endeavor. I'd love to do long form video, but we have found that, at least for the time being with the resources that we have, that, that the written word or copy is the cheapest stuff to make, right? It's the cheapest stuff to research. You just pay some poor writer that works in a cave all day, just pennies on the dollar to write. I mean, they're the cheapest people that'll work for you, and it's the cheapest stuff to create. And so we've just found a lot of ROI in terms of leaning into like the strengths of our team, but also the strengths of the impact of and the cost effectiveness of copywriting.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have a best example of repurposing in terms of maybe a standout report or white paper or article or something that you can think of where you just think that was just such a great example of we created it for this reason, but then this is what we managed to do with it?
Yeah, and the process is still unfolding about the example that I'm going to provide. But I think it was in late last year, early this year, we released our 6sense research team, which is a team of analysts and data nerds who did a lot of research on the buying experience, not as presented by sellers, right? Which is typically what you read about. Sellers talking about what they think the buying experience is like and what they think the important milestones are and what they think the important questions are to ask. We flipped the script on that and told that story from the point of view of buyers themselves. So we surveyed them, we collated that data, we ran the reports and all that. And the idea here was to get almost like an inside view in terms of the world according to buyers, so that not only would we get some great data and insights, but that the end result is something that we believe sellers and marketers would find more value in, because we are peeking into the minds of the people that we're trying to best understand. And instead of just listening to the echo chamber of our own opinions, which is what we do the rest of the time. We did this. The report was lengthy, robust. And what we did is that to create a promotional plan, an ongoing kind of promotional plan to raise awareness and maintain awareness for this research, is that we did a debut. We wrote a blog post that, hey, check out the thing. We published the thing. And then I think it was like one post a week or every other week. I think it was one post a week for, I think, 8 weeks that unpacked a specific insight or revelation that was found in there. So, of course, this is the virtuous cycle of it raises awareness. And of course, because you promote this on socials and other channels, but it maintains awareness for those who may have seen posts prior or know about the report, but haven't downloaded it. And for the new people that didn't see the last 10 tweets about it or whatever, here's an opportunity for them to get the hook in the mouth and reel them in as well. In addition to that, and this is where we're pivoting into generating even more value out of this, is that we had our head of research record some talking head videos, just very brisk stuff about some highlights. Again, just another way to maintain and encourage engagement on social. And now that the dust is settling on the promo, because we got so much high visibility from this and it was very well received, which was a real treat. Now the question becomes, we have some design bandwidth open. We have a little bit of video bandwidth open. How do we best leverage those storytelling channels, right? With infographics, for instance, or a quick infographic video or something a bit modest in scope that would play really nicely generally on social. So that's like the quote phase 2 of this endeavor that we're looking into now. And of course, beyond that, the findings from the report have matriculated into a lot of the coverage that we have been creating for related materials and even unrelated materials ever since. Just like there is like for us, it's not just remixing the content, but it's remembering the importance of the data or the reportage, right? The reporting is in that, and leveraging that in other ways, even if it's just in singular instances that link back to the asset, so that we're increasing our credibility as like research storytellers. We're also increasing the credibility of the blog that we might write or the tweet that we might write, because it's actually factually based. We're able to quantify these things with actual research. It's like a win-win in that respect.
Such a good example. Just reports are just so full of useful insights and information. And as you said, there's so much that you can create, and the content that you share, it can be leading people back to the report, as you mentioned, but in itself, like just sharing an insight, a piece of advice, something that was drawn, a conclusion that you reached from different parts of the report is a valuable post in its own right, even if no one goes on to see the report, if people just see that social content and at that point in time, they're not going to take any further action, it's valuable in its own right. But then it all leads to this really great big piece of content. So there's so much content that you can create from reports. I'd love to know, because obviously you explained loads of different mediums and channels that you've been able to repurpose it to. Is there a way that you typically measure the results of content repurposing? I guess I know that's a challenging question, because how do you measure content? And content repurposing is really just creating content. But are there any sort of decisions or measurements that you would make to say the repurposing of the report in particular, we're going to measure this and we're going to see its impact?
Yeah, great question. Just measurement in general, we have found to be challenging, right? Beyond the kind of, I would call table stakes metrics of, I don't know, time on page or engagement on social, but are we actually like reaching people's minds, right? And that's a harder kind of question to ask. We have begun to, or it's a harder question to answer. We are making a pivot in terms of discovering ways to better quantify that. And not to be a corporate shill, but like we're finding ways to make those determinations using the very technology that 6 Sense, my business, uses, which is measures buyer intent and buyer interest and buyer intent signals and analyzes that stuff. We're taking a closer look at that to try to extract meaning from the kind of the readership. In the meantime, though, we are like activating an endeavor where it's, okay, let's not just look at because typically it's how did the report perform, right? And this is an instance of like, how do we widen the lens so that it's the entire gestalt of all of the things that we have done? Is there a virtuous cycle in cross-linking? Is there a virtuous cycle in savvy social promotion with, let's say, a statistic or whatever? Is there value or impact in the fact that you may not want to read that report? Reports are dense. They're a hard pill to swallow for many time-pressed professionals. So do we measure success by the performance of the report alone? What about those blog posts that provide succinct, your question is perfectly timed, because it's absolutely on our mind where we want to get more nuanced and think less about the performance of a single piece of content. And instead, when relevant with spin-off content or remix content, how do we look at that from a wider lens in terms of like that and like the entire content endeavor, right? And again, we're leaning into looking at analytics to see how these different pieces are performing like on their own. But then again, like looking towards our technology and more than a little bit of intuition, because I think there's an art to this that you just simply can't. There are findings that you can't find in a spreadsheet that you just intuit every once in a while. I know that we're not supposed to say that. We're supposed to lean into the logic and the rationality of data and spreadsheets. But every once in a while, you just have to say, that's just a damn good piece of content. And I think that's why this one's moving the needle more than the other. So that's where we're perfectly positioned to answer your question in about 6 months.
Yeah, no, I love that. I don't think it is the easiest question. Like you said, it's the whole kind of universe that comes from the existence of that piece of content in the first place. And if you repurpose into lots of different platforms and formats and purposes and different stages in the funnel and different intent and things like that, there's a lot to measure, isn't there, in order to see what the result was of what was the opportunity cost of not repurposing that piece of content. What would you have done instead then? Another unrepurposed report. So it's not the easiest. It's a big thing, isn't it? What would you say is perhaps an unexpected result that you've ever had from repurposing? And I'll give you an example. A client that we worked with who we launched a podcast with, a fairly small recruitment company that launched a podcast, very niche. And we went heavy on repurposing content to LinkedIn. And then that built up his LinkedIn audience. And he's ultimately ended up going on a world tour, paid for by his sponsors, do like live interviews throughout different cities in the world for his podcast. But his reputation grew and the sponsors got in touch all through really the repurposing of these podcast episodes to the platforms that they then saw and reached out to him on. So very unexpected. You wouldn't think that would lead to going on a world tour with your podcast. Have you ever had somewhere you would have thought, I'll be damned, I never would have thought that repurposing the content in that way would result in that opportunity.
Yeah, the first one that comes top of mind indeed is this buyer experience report that I was mentioning earlier. Through savvy repurposing that I described, through a really tightly interwoven collaboration with our PR team and a tight relationship with our social team, we were able, and basically it's like we created on the front end before we published anything. It was like, here is like month to month what we would like to do with our content, right? It was PR, it was social, it was how can our partners boost the signal on this? What content do we need to write for them? What videos can we create? And again, looking at this thing from a months long kind of point of view. And that list of things was daunting, and the project kind of oversight was daunting. But not long after we released the report and kind of engaged on this kind of like cross-channel remixing project, a content remixing project, like journalists. So part of this was, of course, like the pitches that our PR team, armed with the right content from the report, they were doing a great job pitching the story to journalists. But there were just like people out in the wild that wanted to interview our lead researcher that just discovered it organically, like a podcast or like I saw your post on LinkedIn, or I saw this particular graphic on LinkedIn. And so I think, and that naturally is the kind of this lightning in a bottle stuff that you hope happens. But just getting a world tour, like you hope something like that would happen, but like you can never bank on it. And so for us, we thought it was an appropriate investment of effort to, again, diversify our content and get it out in the world in different ways. And sure enough, I would say a great deal of the journalistic or interview-based content that came out of that was organic, what I'd call organic, like discovered by independent creators or corporate podcast or whatever. And they started coming to us under that lead researcher for doing interviews. I think that's like top of mind. That's one of the best ways, one of the best examples I can think of that we've really struck gold. Yeah.
And as you said, there's so much time and effort that goes into really comprehensively repurposing. And you guys had planned lots of this in advance, obviously put a lot of time and a lot of resource, and it's great to hear all the results that you had. Is there a certain set of boxes that you look to tick with content that you embark upon to determine whether you're going to put that much time and effort into the repurposing?
Yeah. This process is a smidgen informal in that there is not like a committee that comes together to make a decision, like the decision that I'm about to describe. It's usually me or a couple of me kind of riffing with a couple of people. And what we do is we divide this stuff into tiers, right? Is it a tier one? When a tier one would be something that we would want to spend a great deal of effort, not only on the creation of the content, that kind of cross-departmental collaboration that I've been describing, ad spend. Do we want to boost the signal of this thing? And of course, in a way, that is also a kind of spin-off content, because if you're creating effective ads, you're probably leveraging stuff from the source material to write that compelling ad copy. So in its own way, spiritually, that is, you could consider that kind of like a remix or a reapplication of the source material. But what we do is that we determine, and so a tier one is like this kind of all hands on deck approach. A tier two has a more modest scope. Tier three has a less modest scope, and tier four or tier et cetera, as I like to call it, doesn't have any, right? It's just a blog post, right? And sometimes there's just blog posts. And what I do is that once we've crossed that threshold in terms of this feels like a tier one, and how do I know that? Or how am I making that determination? And this is where I think silos and a lack of communication just destroy these opportunities, right? Is that I'm talking to the researcher before the researcher has written a word, in the instance of this report. And what are you finding? What's your feeling? What's the quality of the data? What kind of stories are seeming to emerge here, right? Because if there is a diversity of stories within that report, that means that there's a diversity of spin-off blog posts that we can write, or a spin-off graphics that we can create. How is the data how do you plan on the data being visualized might be another question. That's something that's a graphic that could be reapplied for social graphic or for reuse in a blog post, whatever. Do you have a tool that you're using to visualize the data? So maybe we can visualize it in other ways, or using different Are you using content that, like, what content do you think won't make the report? What could we do with the stuff that's on the cutting room floor that still actually might provide some good context? Or even if it's just like, here's some unexpected things that we discovered that defied our expectations. We didn't put them in the report, but there's a whole spectrum of things that, but you can only achieve that and acquire that by having, conversations with your highly competent, highly creative collaborators, and then having conversations in terms of, okay, let's bring in our partners from design or video or whatever, social. And then it's basically bringing that into what I will often do all this kind of footwork on my own, and then come to stakeholders with a plan. Like, for instance, that tier 1 plan that is a week by week rollout from November 1st, the publish date, for instance, all the way down to, like, in the instance of our project, I think that we were posting content related to this until at least March of this year. So that's 5 months. That's bananas, right? And every time that we publish that spin-off content is another way or another reason to raise that periscope on social, for instance, or to enable our sales team with some snippet content or with some information in terms of, here's another blog post that is related to this very interesting report that we know that your prospects aren't going to read because it's 30 pages long. So maybe this blog post would be effective instead, et cetera. It's really this kind of conglomeration of highly proactive conversations that in some instances take place months before that long form piece of content, for instance, is ever published.
Hey, just a little break from this week's episode to let you know about becoming a Content 10x Insider. If you want more content repurposing tips and advice, then why not join hundreds of business owners, marketers, and content creators who get them delivered straight to their inbox once a week by subscribing to the Content 10x newsletter. As well as tips and advice, you get industry updates, inspiring stories, exclusive content, offers, and more. You can subscribe at content10x.com/newsletter, and there's a link in the show notes too. Okay, back to this week's episode. Yeah, I completely agree with you and understand that approach. It's a great approach. And what I was going to ask you, it's great to have these categories of content, like you said, know the ABCDs of, like, whether you're going to throw everything into it, like the report, and through to the ones that you're not going to invest too much time in the researching for, and everything in between. And sometimes repurposing, for all the planning in the world, can just strike us at the strangest of moments where there just appears to be an opportunity. And an example was, I spoke to a content marketer called Liz Elfman on this podcast, on the Content 10x podcast, and she came on to share a really interesting story about how a researcher in their organisation had embarked upon a regular series of posts on LinkedIn, where he was having these different meals throughout the year with different researchers and sharing these great LinkedIn posts. And she realised that she could repurpose his year's worth of LinkedIn posts into an ebook. And so, on went the project. I don't think he started off thinking my LinkedIn posts are going to become an ebook. And the inspiration struck her fairly further on in the series when she saw, he's got personality, people love these posts, let's turn it into an ebook. And it was a really successful project. So it struck them unexpectedly and went really well. Do you ever have those moments as well, for all the planning and all the categorizing and knowing where things are going to go? Is there any examples of where a repurposing opportunity came out of the blue?
Yeah, I'll mention two. One is more directly related to your question, and one is a little more kind of playful. But we had for some time, like, a community. The Sixth Sense hosted a community for CFOs, right? Where it was essentially like, hey, once a month or every other month, or it was sales leaders. And it was, we'll get together in a Zoom meeting or whatever. And it's just like a free place and a safe space where we're not going to quote you or anything. We're just having frank conversations and trying to solve problems. And what we would do is that we would write recaps that captured the spirit of these. And this was with a partner. So a partner that was co-sponsoring this experience, their job was to write like these and they were great, these great recaps that kind of summarize the spirit of the conversation and the nature of the back and forth and whatnot without divulging names or any kind of proprietary information. And we published those on the blog, and we decided to shelve that kind of like that meetup, but we had all this great content. That was just that great sales leader related content that it was like, hey, let's stitch this together. And I talked to the co-sponsor of the event, like these events that was creating this content. Hey, would you like to stitch this together into an ebook? And they said yes. That's a good example. Another kind of example, and this is a bit more kind of opportunistic and playful, was that we early this year we wanted to spread the word about Six Senses solution for selling contact data. We have a solution that we believe is really good and it's better than the bad guys, but I don't think we're well known for it. Hey, let's spread the word about that. So we created a campaign, and we had a playful theme, which was dump your current data vendor. Okay. So like a relationship. And so what we created like a relationship advisor hotline, a 1-800 number that you could call, right? And there was a website that had a relationship quiz that you could determine if you're, in a bad relationship with your vendor. And we had a legitimate straight-laced guide that was highly informative about what to look for in a good vendor and what to be aware of for bad vendors. But it was all wrapped in this retro 90s themed, playful dump your bad boyfriend theme. And we published this in, let's say, January. And then we realized by early February that it's like Valentine's Day is right around the corner. And we didn't even anticipate like creating spin-off content to capitalize on that. So I very briskly realized, hey, let's do this. And we put the pedal to the metal and created a little supporting child page for that experience. That was all, tell your current data vendor, happy anti-Valentine's Day, I'm dumping you, something like that. Little playful anti-Valentine's Day cards and stuff like that, little stickers that you could print out on sticker paper and give to your bad boyfriend. That was an instance where just by sheer overwork, we didn't see the opportunity because we were busy trying to ship the thing and get it live in January. And then once it was live, just having a moment to breathe and realizing that we had an opportunity that we could seize there, and a playful one at that. And that was a very successful kind of follow-up to what was already a very successful campaign.
I suppose what you said, because of almost overwork, you didn't see that coming, but at the same time, it sounds like you did so much good work with the plan to get it out in January that when it crossed your mind that, wait a minute, February, is it the 14th? I should really know. No,
14th,
is it
yeah.
The 14th February?
Here in the States,
Valentine's, yeah. It is, yeah. You saw that coming. It sounds like you had such great content that it probably wasn't, it was some rewording and tweaking, and it was a slight sort of shift in another play on something already playful. So at least
that's right.
All that good work, then the timeliness came to just do something different. I really love that. It was such a great example. What would you say is a big misconception that you hear content marketers sometimes refer to when they're talking about repurposing content, like perhaps an apprehension to embrace repurposing content based on some kind of misconception as to what it means to do it properly?
Yeah, I'm going to flip it a little bit because I agree that there is a great deal of apprehension, but there seems to be this misbelief that this shit's easy. And it's not. We'll remix it. Yeah, that's what we'll do. And it's like, that is not easy. You need to make that spin-off content be able to stand on its own often. It needs to have the relevant context for people who are coming to this kind of experience or this information cold. It has to be optimized for the different channels that you're doing. For instance, something on social and what you'd find on a blog post or a product page, the expectations of the audience are different. And I think that's often overlooked. The strengths of one medium over another. Hey, this works really well as a written piece, but like for the channel of social, we just simply can't put more than 50 words, and that's even too much, into a social post. How could we convey the same information in a way that's more effective for that particular audience. So it requires knowing your audience, knowing their expectations, and having the willingness to open your mind to the possibility of this remixing or repurposing. It takes imagination and it takes a fluency in different mediums and different channels and audience expectations that one individual on your team may not be fluent in. It may require multiple people sitting down with who have different professional viewpoints and saying, how can we do this? How can we crack this nut? So there's that. And then there is the matter of time. I think that content teams, and this is where a solution like your companies serve such a great need, is that internally, I think that many content teams, for instance, are under the gun to ship. We have to do the next thing and we have to do the next thing. And there's a new product that we got to do. And I got to write emails and I got to write the freaking landing page for the hateful webinar. There's the list goes on. And there is very little time unless you make it to think about the opportunities for that spin-off content or that repurposed content. Again, that is an absolutely natural thing to experience. I'm not throwing shade on people that don't have the time or can't make the time to do that. I'm one of those people. It is very challenging to extract yourself from the daily. But I have found that being able to take 5 steps back from the daily grind whenever you can, and just much like how a content creator has a writer mind when they're writing the content, and then must pivot to an editorial mind, right? There is this third mind that we are often overlooking, which is the greater opportunity for this kind of like the multiverse of content that you can create after you've done that editing. Another thing that I think that folks probably aren't thinking about much is the power of generative AI and how Gen AI can be used to remix or create the process or start the process of remixing content for different channels. I'm not going to say that when I tell my generative AI tool to read a blog post and write a tweet for it, that it's an A+ tweet, but it's better than 0. And that's like probably 5 to 10 minutes that, I didn't have to spend reading that piece of content and then writing a tweet and then tweaking the tweet, etc. And there are just so many other opportunities like that. I think that for folks who have the apprehension, it's probably a resources thing, and I get that. But for folks who have this on their mind but haven't executed on it, that's where I think that the topic of it's challenging. You as an individual may not be able to solve it on your own. Be humble, be collaborative, bring in other people with other expertise, and then make the time to consider what those different channels or stories might be, and to look at tools like generative AI as a way to shortcut that process when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it wasn't the plan, but I almost could just use most of your answer there as a sales pitch for Content 10X, actually.
That's why I'm here.
Why would you work with Content 10X? Here's what Chris Hutchins has to say.
Right.
What would you say is one of the biggest mistakes that you see people make with repurposing? So just maybe your moment of, they've misunderstood and they're making a mistake with how they're going about doing this.
Yeah, I can't cite a specific example, but I feel the greatest risk that my team faces is, again, this kind of assumed fluency that reader or an audience might have that hails from that writer's fluency in the subject matter. What do I mean by this? So I've read the report. I've been indoctrinated in the report. I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm fluent in all of the stats. There is a temptation for younger creators especially to assume that the end user who has never read the report, who will never read the report, who is just through sheer happenstances finding this repost on LinkedIn from their long lost friend from their first job out of school, somehow this is washed up on their beach. And there is like this kind of proscenium of content that needs to be included, even to the point of like, we're not talking about emails. We're talking about sales emails. We're not talking about sales emails. We're talking about B2B sales emails. Even just like little contextual clues that are so important for cold readers And so there is this, and this stuff can be obviously identified in the editorial process after that spin-off content has been written. But even then, those kind of like contextual clues may not be relayed into the final product. So I'm always a champion for the audience, and always assuming that the audience is smart, but may not know what we know, and trying to bring them up to speed as quickly as we can, even especially in spin-off content.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. If you could give one piece of advice to a B2B marketing manager with a very small team, but a desire to start making the most out of their content, what would it be? Just that one piece of advice as they're trying to figure it out with limited resources.
Yeah, I call this like working the grill and managing the restaurant. Okay. We as content creators are obligated to ship our content and have a regular output, right? And this is the part of the movie where you're just working the grill and you're writing the thing and you're shipping and you're writing the thing and shipping. And I would recommend that kind of content is pretty modest in word count or scope, right? Maybe it's a 600-word blog post. And it doesn't have to be a 1,200 or a 1,000-word blog post. Let's focus on telling tight stories very, exceptionally. And maybe we tell those tight stories over the course of 3 blog posts. And like we say, part 1 of 2, part 1 of 3, part 2 of 3, whatever. But while you're creating that modest content, you have made a plan and are executing on long form content under the waterline. Nobody knows you're doing this. Your readers don't know that you're working on this. So that, let's say once a month, I'll just pull a stat out of my head. Once a month, you're dropping a long form guide that will then generate a kind of value for the business and your website in a way that individual blog posts don't. So you're already, because there's like a whole like suite of black magic SEO stuff that's going on when you're dropping a long form piece of content rather than blogs, right? There's a science to that. But now that you've shipped that great big woolly mammoth, now you can start looking at ways to cut it up to create the very spin-off content that we're discussing. So there is like this process that needs to be baked into the workload where you're not, yes, a part of you as a creator or an editor or a content manager is shipping on the regular, these small things, but you're spending the rest of your time under the waterline, creating a long form piece of content that'll generate far more value than just simply the content itself, if you then have a plan to remix it.
Absolutely fantastic advice. And I'm sure anyone listening thinking, I need to know the answer to this question. I've got a small team, small resources. What do I do? Fantastic question. So thank you, Chris. So the final question that I have for you, actually, it relates to our new season 3 of B2B Content Strategist. So you were an amazing guest on our 2nd season. And in a way, you're going to play a role in kicking off season 3 because we have a new feature where we're going to be asking each guest who is a leader in a B2B marketing team, just like yourself, we're going to ask them a question that the previous guest asked. And so my question to you is, imagining that you were in a room full of director level content leaders in a similar organization, peers, and you could just ask one question to the room of peers.
I would say, what tips can you offer for communicating with very important stakeholders outside of your marketing silo about business goals, product roadmap, business strategy? How do you engage with those subject matter experts who are outside of your comfort zone and out of your everyday kind of interactions? Why do I ask this question? Because I have found that if you really want to have your content speak as explicitly as you can to your solution, where your solution is going, the concerns of our investors, which become the concerns of our C-suite, is to talk to those people, right? And to get that highly valuable intelligence that can then inform on you in a boots on the ground point of view, how you can execute on those things. And I have found, or it has been like my experience, that people like to stick with their tribe. Marketers like to stick with marketers, or maybe they hang out with salespeople every once in a while and they can talk to hey, salesperson, what's on the mind of your prospects? But that's not the same. That's not the same as talking to the head of product or talking to someone in the C-suite, talking to a CFO or whatever. Hey, if we're courting CFOs with our solution, maybe I ought to talk to my CFO to find out the most important concerns that they have. So I'm getting it straight from, instead of interpret something third hand or fourth hand or just make assumptions, why not get on the phone with the dude? And that can be scary, right? To talk to people that you're not familiar with, that you might think are more experienced or smarter than you. But our job is we're paid to be stupid. And what I mean by that is to come to conversations with a beginner's mind. And in that respect, there is only humility. There is no ego. And being willing to be adventurous in your outreach and being humble in your approach to be a sponge and learn, I think that's a highly successful strategy for content strategy. So that's what's motivating the question. But the question, of course, is how do you advise on doing it?
No, I love that question. So thank you so much. Such a great question. I'll be looking forward to posing that question. I'll get in touch with you and let you know how that goes. And I'm going to be sharing this snippet over on the Content 10X podcast as well. You'll be appearing on those shows. So thank you so much, Chris. Where would you like people to go to connect with you, let you know that they heard you on the show, how great it was?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can just search for Chris Hutchins, Hutchins. And I work for a company called 6 Sense. And if you want to learn more about our stuff and read our awesome propaganda that I help oversee and create on the regular, you can find us at 6sense.com.
Yeah, we'll provide the links to everything, including the link to the awesome report that you talked about as well. So we'll make sure that we provide the links to connect with you, 6 Sense, and obviously some of the content that you've referred to as well. So thank you so much. It's great speaking to you once again. So thank you so much.
I'm honored, Amy. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that discussion and thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy the Content 10X podcast, then why not hit that subscribe button on your podcast listening app of choice so that you can get updated when new episodes are released. And I'd really, really appreciate it if you could leave a review as well. That really makes a difference for the podcast. Also, please do get a copy of my book, Content 10X, More Content, Less Time, Maximum Results. It is the ultimate guide to repurposing every type of content, and it's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback and also in audiobook as well. And you can head to content10x.com/book to find all the other places that you can get a copy of my book. And if you would like us to do your content repurposing for you, then we offer a fully end-to-end done for you content repurposing service. This is for podcasters and video content creators. We have our podcast 10X, video 10X, and also our specific LinkedIn 10X service, helping you to become the leading authority in your industry on LinkedIn. You can find out so much more about our services on our website. And also, please do give me a follow on the social media platforms. I share lots and lots of tips and advice on social media about content repurposing. I'm at Content 10X on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you try content10x.com/LinkedIn, you'll find my LinkedIn profile over there as well. All that's left to say is thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.